My name is Lori Robinson, and I'm originally from North Carolina. I was born in North Carolina, and my family is a mix. And I didn't know much about it because I didn't grow up with my grandparents. And after I lost my mother recently, I started doing a lot of my family history, as I'm sure we all do. And I'm finding out a lot of differences. I knew my father was Scottish, and knew that my mother, we're all from a real small town of 3,000 people, and I just knew that she lived nearby. I never really knew her heritage, and as I've been looking into it, I find my mom is a mix of a number of things, and I found that we have mulatto in our family, so I did a DNA study recently to find out that we have ties to Europe, ties to Africa, and it was amazing to do a DNA analysis because even Anastasia Jew was in my DNA, and my father's family, some are from Germany, so that, could make sense to me. But honestly, I grew up really not being very aware of a lot of religious differences, very small town and not very much exposure. I think we had one Jewish family in my town, the Line ones, and they were wonderful, one of my dad's best friends, but I really didn't know very much about it.
So how did you end up coming to Savannah?
My brother moved here to take a job, and my father had passed away, and I was going through a divorce, and my brother was very nurturing to me at that time and kept saying, come visit, and my sister-in-law was working for the Tenenbaums and was on the Historic Review Board because Arnold was, so therefore she was, and she needed an artist to donate a piece of artwork, and I was teaching high school in North Carolina, teaching art, and she asked me to do something, and I did. And at that auction, Paul bid on my artwork, so that's kind of how we met. That's cool.
All right, so I'm gonna switch attention to you, Paul, and if you would
Okay.
introduce yourself and then tell me a little bit about how your people came to this area and where they originally came from.
I'm Paul Robinson. As they say, I'm a native of Savannah. Just as a little sidelight, many years ago, a man died. He was like 85 or 90 years old, and Savannah, he had moved to Savannah when he was 2 years old, and the Savannah paper had an obituary that said such and such, native of Russia. Can't be a native here unless you've been born here. My parents, my father was born in Russia, a city called Smolensk, and he came here when he was 2 years old with several other family members. His father opened up a clothing store on the corner of Park Avenue and what used to be West Broad and now MLK. And they lived on the top floor and had a store on the ground floor, which was very common in that time. My mother was born in Eastport, Maine, which is the northeasternmost city in the continental U.S. She moved down here because her father owned a clothing store also, and they had a fire. He had no insurance, and I don't know whether it was an argument or whatever, but he separated from his wife. He moved to Virginia, and my mother and her two sisters moved to Savannah because they had a relative here. And what was your second question, Carol?
Well, what did they do when they got here? We know why did they move to Savannah,
Oh,
and what did they do?
My parents met, and they married fairly late in life. My mother was housekeeper. You know, she was in the home, and my father purchased a lumber company in the 1940s. It was called Bay Street Lumber Company, and that was the predecessor to what my brother-in-law and I formed some years later into a home center called Builderama.
Let me ask a few questions of the two of you, and then you can scoosh over. Okay. In Savannah.
Well, I was born on 53rd Street and Bull Street, and moved several times, but when I was, I guess, 5 or 6 years old, I was living at corner of Washington Avenue and Paulson, and there were a lot of kids my age, boys my age in that neighborhood that I became friendly with. Interestingly enough, all of them went to the B.B. Jacob with their family, and I was about the lone party going to the Mikveh Israel, and consequently I never got bar mitzvah because there were no bar mitzvahs in that time at the Reform Synagogue.
I didn't know that.
Were you confirmed?
I was confirmed, and during the time that I was in synagogue, Rabbi Starrels was the rabbi at that time. He was just a great person. Just sort of sidelight, he gave sermons, and he spoke. I speak slow, but he spoke incredibly slower than I, and so there was the constant comment about people that he put them to sleep during his sermons. Anyway, getting back to going to Sunday school, I learned Hebrew in Sunday school, but it was not concentrated like the other kids that went 5 days a week. And so I can still read a little bit. I can pick it up a little bit, but not a whole lot.
I'm interested in something that you said you had friends that were B.B. Jacob and AA Synagogue, but some of the people that I talked to, they say that Mikveh Israel people didn't necessarily socialize over at the JEA because they didn't feel welcome. Did you ever feel like you were not welcome?
I never felt that at all. Certainly, the people I knew well, there was none of that at all.
So what was your favorite activities growing up?
Well, we used to play football in on the playground of Savannah High School, and riding a bike, and let's see, what other kinds of things? That's
Getting in
Were
trouble.
any of the getting in trouble? Were any of these activities that you did, like riding your bike back and forth to the J or to synagogue? Were any of these in any way Jewish activities?
Well, I didn't ride my bike to the J because at that time the Jewish Alliance was downtown, and I lived south, considerably south of that. Yes, there were Jewish connections, particularly when I became a young teenager. Well, no, going back further, I was a member of Troop 2, the Boy Scouts, and
Who were your leaders?
Prior to that, I was a Cub Scout with bunch of Jewish guys, and then we had sort of a alternating den mothers. They would take over for a few months at a time. Went to I was in the Boy Scouts, and then after that, I was a member of Young Judea, which was also a group of Jewish kids, and we went to conventions, and I went to the mikveh Israel, just going back to the synagogue. I went to the mikveh Israel a lot on Saturdays, on the Sabbath, and my friends would go to the B.B. Jacob on Saturday, and afterwards we'd all join each other and go to a movie, and then we rode the bus from Broughton Street back home.
Not exactly the same experience you would have nowadays. I'm going to stop just for a moment. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. You're an artist. What did you think about Savannah when you moved here?
I thought it was beautiful.
Tell me something about your impressions of it artistically, architecturally, or as an art community. And of course now we're talking about more modern times.
Right. Well, when I came here, and I told you my town was very small. It's a rural town, and so we didn't have the historic buildings that you have, and certainly not the big, heavy Spanish malls. And so from the beginning, it was enchanting to me. And I think when we first started dating, he would always remark that I would ooh and ah, around every bend, something I thought was gorgeous. And I would always say what I felt like was, oh gosh, that's beautiful, it's beautiful. And later on he said, I began to appreciate my city like I had never done so before we married, because he never was looking around at it. He had always been here. And except for college, he really didn't, get the opportunity to live in a different place. And so I loved it from the beginning, and I liked that artist. You said the artist community here. It wasn't so much that, because I'm really a homebody in some ways, and we spend all our time together. But the one thing that, in relating this to his culture, is from the beginning, I felt like his friends, which then would be mostly Jewish friends, they had a high esteem for artists, and I had never felt that. And where I was from, it wasn't regarded that way, and it made me very proud to be able to say that I was an artist. And initially, when I started painting and having shows, I think a big part of my success was the confidence that I, gained, because his friends were so good about purchasing my work. And I look back now and I think, boy, they were really good friends, because early work was different. And but it gave me a sense of accomplishment and pride, and I moved on from there. I have great friends.
All right. So she admires buildings, but you have something to do with buildings through your occupation. So tell me a little bit about what you do and the kinds of ways that your business has impacted Savannah.
Well, I went to the University of Florida and graduated as an architect. And my first year out of architecture school, a professor, he was connected to the National Park Service, and the buildings are historic buildings. And he got me a job in San Juan. I was married at the time, so we went to San Juan only for a year, and I was a historic, an architect with historic preservation there. Came back to Savannah, worked as an architect for 3 years, and then went into a family business for a number of years. And trying to think, Oh, it was around 30 years ago. The business was purchased by an English company, and so I had to go and find another pursuit, which was fairly easy because I happened to, I'm a list person. I make a lot of lists to do. And one of them was to go to Historic Savannah Foundation, and I just do visit. And I had a lot of time, so I went there one day, and for some reason I really was attracted to some of the program that they were promoting on renovation of historic buildings. So during the 80s, I bought and renovated a number of buildings. My preceding work allowed me, gave me a lot of experience in doing that. So that was sort of my second trade or business operation.
Which we still do today.
Well, and today it's not historic preservation. We have bought some historic buildings and done some renovation, but right now we're doing mostly property management.
I've seen some names like Wickower and was it Eichberg, the
Eichberg Hall.
The famous Jewish architects who were working as architects in a time when you wouldn't think that Jews would necessarily get a city or a governmental commission because there were quotas or certain restrictions. Do you have any influences that on things that you've enjoyed doing that are specific to the fact that it has more of a Jewish style, or something that a mentor perhaps from the Jewish community through architecture or building or business that you've admired? Or one thing has nothing to do with the other?
Well, I do have a relation to that. When I first started being involved in historic preservation, a guy named Lee Adler, who was probably the grandfather, he was early on in trying to save buildings from being demolished. And somehow he and I struck up a friendship. He was a lot older than I. Anyway, he very quickly after we knew each other, he arranged for me to visit a number of cities and where they had historic buildings, and talk to the people there about historic preservation. And he got me into a lot of places that just an individual would not be able to access. And I took a trip for, I think it was about 2.5 or 3 weeks, just going it was mostly on the east, well, it was all on the eastern seaboard. But that's about the only connection like that.
Through networking or business, did you ever experience anti-Semitism? Or a limit to what you were able to do because...
Never.
Did you ever have any clubs or sports events that you wanted to participate in that you couldn't because you were Jewish?
Not personally, but there were places, Savannah Yacht Club.
Could you golf everywhere because you were a golfer?
Yeah, 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 all of the golf courses were accessible, no problems with Jews coming. But the Savannah Yacht Club had a restriction. The Oglethorpe Club had a restriction. I think they still do. Those are the only two that I can think of.
But through business, it did not hinder your.
Absolutely not.
So let me ask you a question. You said that Jewish people seem to appreciate art. Is there any particular reason you think that there does seem to be a preponderance of Jewish people
I think
who
it's-
have cultural or artistic pursuits?
I think it's the way that they're raised, how they value your values or from your core and how you're taught as a child. So I guess it's just, I would assume that it's handed down generation to generation to appreciate and, and have a high regard for the arts.
Have you had any difficulty with anti-Semitism since you've moved here when people find out that, you're married to a prominent Jewish family?
No, but I've had the opposite. Being not Jewish and married to Paul, there's been some of it I understand and some of it I don't. There's a divide. And one of the first things that happened was one of the Orthodox rabbis, I guess Paul was going to introduce him, and just not ugly, but he just turned and walked away, just not acknowledging me. And so Paul was explaining to me, and then shortly thereafter, in all the time we've been here, I've really only ever had one person that wasn't nice, and to the point that she would, turn, and if I tried to speak, glare in a number of different public venues. And so I went to talk to my good friend who is my preacher, and I said, this is bothering me, and how do I deal with it? And he put it in a good light for me. He said, Lori, if it's her value system, if it's coming from what she holds dear to her, then you can't fault her for it. So you have to look at it like that. She may not do it in the nicest of ways, or like the rabbi he wouldn't glare at me, he just turned. And so now if I think of it in the same way that I think of, it's a belief system, and you can't, then it's easier for me to accept it. It doesn't
So
hurt
there wasn't
any less
anything
when
personal.
it happens. Right. It doesn't, it still hurts, but if I can keep my head in it and not get all emotional, then it's better for me.
Well, so not to ask an offensive question, but so Paul, how did your family react when you were going to marry someone who was, you come from a long-standing Jewish family? Were there repercussions?
I didn't have parents at the time. I have one sister, and no other relatives. A few cousins that lived in Savannah, but there was no objection.
Probably the age
at all.
difference was a bigger issue.
Not the objection, but the very high concern on the part of my children. I have 3 kids, and for maybe, not for because of the religious aspect of it, but because I was marrying someone. I think because I was marrying someone much younger than I, and also I was marrying someone that I didn't know for a real long time. It was I think we got married after a year and a half of knowing each other.
Well, is that a Southern thing, a bias about not knowing her people or not knowing her for a long period of time? Do you find that in the South things tend to move a little slower, and so
Oh my God.
people want you to know the people you're going to associate with?
I have always said, and I've experienced this, that the closer one gets to the equator, the slower life becomes. You're laughing.
I didn't think anything of it. I mean, of our time, it seemed to me like, we had dated for 1.5 years. That seemed a very long time. I think their concern was more, Dad's marrying a younger girl, because even Eric, his son, is married to someone who's not Jewish, and so I think they had already
Dealt
been
with that
okay
issue.
with that. Yeah, and he's an architect. We were talking about that. He's in Berkeley, but as far as that, I don't think it was an issue. And looking from the outside, my mother was very Christian, but my dad wasn't. My dad lost his mom when he was 5, and so, you don't have the person taking you to Sunday school every Sunday, and so, it was funny so I've always been kind of back and forth on how I feel about, not necessarily as hard-nosed or as devout as my mother may be. And the first time she met Paul, she was asking him, had he considered converting? And he says, if you don't try to convert me, I won't try to convert you. And so she kind of laughed and
No,
she
I
left
said,
it
if
alone.
you don't want to prophesize me,
Yeah, that's
I'll
right.
return that favor to you.
Yeah.
So Paul, what makes you Jewish?
Mhm.
What makes me Jewish?
When born of a Jewish mother, halakhically,
Right.
that makes you Jewish.
Right.
But when you think about your life and who you are as a person, what are the elements? What are the ethics? What are the teachings that have always been part of your life that makes you who you are as a Jewish man?
Well, going back to the culture, I think the culture is one that the parents want their kids to excel. And education is the vehicle that one can, get to a point in life where they can earn a living and can interact with people and just be good people. And that's a hard one.
It is.
Well,
What you're asking.
So if you're talking to your children and your grandchildren for the generations to come, what are the innate lessons you learned about who you are as a Jewish Southern gentleman that you think are important to pass on? What tradition or what snippet of life lesson is worth passing on to the next generation?
Well, you said that we signed a release before this interview, and I have to admit I'm sort of a heathen when it comes to being Jewish.
That's okay.
So, as far as teachings of Judaism, I haven't imparted that to my children very much.
Well, you know what? One of the things that people talk about are Jewish ethics, ethics in business, being a good person, giving
Yeah,
back to your
yeah.
community. So whether you're able to articulate that is part of who you are, can you tell me something about, for example, your philosophy of business and how you relate to other people?
I always try to treat people fairly. I am not egotistical. I don't think I'm egotistical in any way. As an example of fairness or honesty, a number of years ago I was at Kroger and made a purchase, and I gave the cashier a $20 bill, a $10 bill for something I picked up, and she gave me change for $20. And I said, ma'am, you gave me change for $20, and she was she was arrogant about it. No, I didn't. I said, so we had a word or two, and I said, well, when you check up at the end of the day, you'll find out you're short, but I'll keep it there now, for now.
That's one of the things about Paul, even if he doesn't know what innately is Jewish, there are things about him that I love, and one of them is he has such a good moral compass, and he is giving without having to his community, to Jewish activities without bragging about it, and he is just what he teaches his kids is treat other people the way you want to be treated, which is how my mother taught me. And so as far as, I wondered, getting married to a Jewish person, is there going to be a conflict? Because my kids were still young at that time. And I have to say, one thing that shocked me, I never saw Paul as Jewish when we were dating. I had a hang up with the 20 years. I wouldn't answer him when he was calling because I didn't want, I just couldn't see myself dating someone 20 years older. But when my ex-husband found out that I was dating Paul, he called me up one day and he said, I think there's something you failed to tell me. And he was really angry. And I said, I know, the age difference. And he said, no, he's a Jew. Shocked the sin out of me because Robin's roommate at college was Ricky Lyman. So he had roomed with a Jewish man, but could not allow a Jewish man to be any way part of raising his children. It was shocking, and his mother started this campaign of writing letters like, you're a horrible mother and you have to raise your children Christian. And I said, I'm not going to raise them any other way than what I was raised, but I'm hoping that they'll be tolerant and understanding, and if it opens their mind a small amount, then wonderful. And that's kind of the way I had to come into it, because if I try to say, oh, are we equally yoked, and just get into the whole thought of religion, it doesn't, it's too much, it's too big of a question. But the core of us, when I'm raising my kids, I say, don't discriminate, and examples of what's happened to Jewish people or to African Americans or whatever, my kids are being raised and having a much better understanding of those intolerances in people, and they're wonderful kids now, aren't they? And they see no lines. They really see no religious lines, color lines, anything. It's really kind of sweet.
I love that, because when you look at the world today and how it's so easy to get along, but it's so easy for barriers to go up that just don't seem to be correctable. They don't, there are people who just won't accept other people
Right.
for whatever reason. And it seems like you've come to a nice detente in your
Yeah.
marriage.
And my son was 18 one time, and he's like, Mom, I said, are you going to come with me to church? And it's always funny because if we had something going on and I wanted Paul to come to be a part of it with kids, he would always come. And if he had something going on, then I would go with him. So it was kind of nice. Not that either one of us was overly religious in all the day-to-day, but when things really did matter, we tried to be there for each other. But when my son was 18, he said, Mom, I don't know what I think about all this anymore. And we were talking about church that day, and I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, I think I'm a theist. And I said, you're an atheist? He said, no, I'm a theist. I said, oh, okay, well, I'm okay with that, just as long as do you believe in a higher being? Yes. I said, okay, well, it's really about, you, Rob, and how you end up treating people in this world. I can deal with it. So even my child, being raised in this multi-religious family, is finding his way of dealing with it. So that's really kind of sweet.
Okay, so parting words. Is there anything that we didn't discuss or that I didn't ask about that you want to talk about?
Just to continue on with this a little bit, I think, I know that I was very respectful of my father, and he didn't teach me with in an active way, but I learned by example of his example of how to live. And I think that's the same thing with my children.
And one other thing I was going to say was, when you ask about did anybody have anything to say about you marrying somebody outside the faith? I've always wondered in the back of my mind if I'm his second wife, and he's had a Jewish wife and had 3 Jewish children, and so I wondered if people are more tolerant because he's kind of done what he's supposed to do in that respect. I've always thought about that. So anyway. But,
Thank you both very much.
Yeah.
I enjoyed this.
cool.